Hello and welcome to the 741 channel. Thank you for stopping by. Today we're going to take a look at changing the multifunction switch on my 2004 Chevy Tahoe. Now this procedure should be similar on any of these Chevy trucks or SUVs made anywhere from the early to late 2000s. Things may be a little different depending on your vehicle, but overall the process ought to be similar. So there's a common problem with this multifunction switch that GM put on all of these vehicles, and it manifests itself in different ways over time. Now in my case, what's happening is if I have the headlights on and I go to take a right turn, I put the blinker on to the right, what ends up happening is the high beam lights come on and I end up blinding people. I can kind of wiggle the switch a little bit to kind of get it not to happen, but sometimes I forget and I go to take a right turn and I blind people. So it's time to change this switch. So here's a look at the new switch. This is the part number that I bought. There'll be a link down in the description below if you want to check this out. But again, these are slightly different vehicle to vehicle, so make sure you research and get the right part for yours. Now I opted to go with the AC Delco branded part instead of one of the Chinese alternatives that are available on Amazon, even though those are quite a bit cheaper. And the reason I did that is because I knew that the Delco part would be a little bit better quality and will probably last a little bit longer. I was afraid that if I went with one of the cheap Chinese parts, I'd have the same problem here in a couple of months, or maybe it would even be worse. Anyway, here's a look at the new switch. Once we get the old one out, you'll notice that it should look just like the old one. So in terms of disassembly, the first thing I'm going to do is lower the steering column as far as it'll go. And now what I'll do is put the gear lever all the way down into low 1 to get it out of the way. And then I'm going to pull this dash bezel out from around the instrument cluster, heater, and radio controls. And this just comes straight out with a little bit of force. And we just pull it up and move it out of the way. Then what I'll do is put the truck back up in park, and then I'll put the steering column in the highest position. Next up, I'm going to pop the handle off of the tilt control. I'm going to use this little spudger tool to kind of help me pry that off. You can see that just clips into the grooves in the control there and locks in place with these two tabs. You can see that underneath the steering column on the lower trim piece, there's 3 holes here. Now it looks like there should be some sort of screws or some kind of fastener in there to hold this on, but I don't see anything on here, so I don't know if that means somebody was in here before me or if that's just the way GM made it. Either way, you'll want to check your vehicle to see if there are any fasteners installed in there and remove them if they are. So next up, I'm going to work on separating the 2 halves of the trim piece that goes around the steering column. What I'm going to try and do is start from the back here. There's sort of a locking clip on here. I'm going to use either my spudger tool or a small screwdriver to kind of get in there and work that back locking clip out first, and then I can hopefully separate this along the rest of the seam after that. Okay, so I was able to get it started. Now I'm going to use the spudger tool to try and work this apart a little more. So now I'll jump in and kind of work on the other side. Okay, so the other side is very similar. I'm going to put the screwdriver in and try and work the back apart first. And from the marks on the plastic here, it looks like somebody was in here before me, so maybe this switch has even been changed at one point in the past, I'm not sure. So you can see I've got these separated. Now there's a rubber boot around the shift lever here that kind of holds things together a little bit from the looks of it. So I think I'm going to lift the steering column up here. And what I'll try and do now is work out this bottom piece first. There we go. So this lip on the trim piece was kind of behind the steering wheel a bit. So I just kind of had to push on it and pry it. And now it's out of the way. What I think I'll do is bring the steering column back down temporarily. And now we should be able to pull this top one off the rest of the way. Okay, now we should be able to get at the switch. So I'm going to go freehand with the camera for a minute here. Hopefully this doesn't get too shaky on you guys. But you can see now what we need to do is remove a few of these wiring harness connectors. There's one on top of the switch. It looks like there's one over here on the side, maybe 2. I think there's one kind of hiding behind this one. And then there's one down here, sort of under the instrument cluster, that needs to come out as well. So these connectors all just have locking tabs that need to be pried gently up before the plug can be removed. So I'm going to put the camera back on the tripod and do the rest of these with 2. There is one more connector that needs to be removed here, but I can't really access the locking tab, so I'm going to wait until I can get the switch out Then we can take that out once the switch is free and I can rotate it. There's two screws that hold the switch to the steering column. There's one down here behind the steering wheel and one on top. I'm going to use this right angle T25 Torx key to remove these. And I'll start with the bottom one first. Okay, so I got the first one out. So this top one should be a whole lot easier to remove since there's nothing in the way of it. So the switch is just about out. Just have to remove this last connector. So here's the old switch. Let's go grab the new one. So here's the new and old switches side by side. I'm going to pull this little protective sleeve off. You should be able to see that they look pretty much identical. This one's just a little bit newer and doesn't have the marking worn off quite as much as this one. So installation's gonna be pretty much the opposite of the removal. So the first thing I'll do is install this inner plug into the receptacle because we won't be able to access it real well once this is installed. So there is this spring-loaded pin back here on the back side of the switch. I think this has something to do with the blinker cancel. Anyway, this needs to be kind of put in place, but this is going to sort of get in the way a little bit. So I kind of just got to be mindful of that and kind of activate it almost so that I can get this seated into place where it needs to be. So now I'm going to put the top screw back in. Now we'll put the bottom one in. This one, of course, is a little bit tricky because the steering wheel is in the way. So what I'll do now is reconnect the rest of the plugs here. Now we should be ready to put the trim pieces back on. So I'm going to start with the top trim piece. And one thing to note is that this rubber boot that's around the shift lever has sort of a groove in it that fits around the plastic here. So I imagine this is going to be a little tricky to keep lined up as we try and put this in place. So what I'll do now is bring back the tilt handle temporarily and move the steering column all the way up to make it a little easier to work with the bottom trim piece here. Now again, I'm going to want to kind of work this into the groove in the boot here, which I can see has already popped off of the top piece, but I think we can work with that here as it starts to go together. Now that I've got that kind of roughly in place, but not clipped in, I'm going to move the steering column back down sort of to a neutral position and sort of try and work this boot back into place. So now that I have the boot in place, I'm going to work these two halves together, starting with the back. Not sure if you guys can see that in this shot, but there's a little bit of a hook on the lower part of the trim piece that hooks around a pin that's molded into the top piece. So we'll kind of start there and then work it forward. Then as I put this together, I want to make sure that all these clips and pins line up with kind of where they're supposed to go. Okay, that side looks good. Now we'll move over to the other side and get that clipped together. Now again, on this side, I'm going to work from the back forward. I'll clip that hook that's on the back first, and then just try and line everything up here as best I can. Okay, looks like we're good to go there. So now I'm going to shift down into low gear again, just to make room for this bezel to come back into place. Okay, so we'll get this kind of roughly positioned. I'll make sure that all these spring clips line up with the holes they're supposed to fit into, and then just work it back in place. And the last thing to do is to put the tilt handle back in place. And that should do it. Okay, so let's test out the switch and see if everything's working. Looks like the right blinker is working and the left blinker is working. And if I turn the lights on and actuate the blinkers, the high beams are no longer coming on. So I think we've got a win. I'll just test out the windshield wipers. Those seem to be working. Now, of course, this truck has cruise control, but I'm not going to be able to test that until I get out on the road. Now, truth be told, I really don't use cruise control anyway, so even if that didn't work, it wouldn't bother me in the least. That's going to wrap things up for replacing the multi-function switch on my 2004 Chevy Tahoe. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to leave a comment or subscribe, feel free to do that as well. If you'd like to support my channel in another way, please consider visiting my Amazon store, which you'll find linked in the description below. Thanks for watching. Really?